into tonight's session. Welcome, everybody. Thank you to Rob for and the guys for getting us in touch with, or putting me in touch with David. David and I have had a couple of conversations already, and we're very much in alignment and similar histories in our growing up years, really, which was really lovely to connect on that level. Synchronicities always happen. We left the last history session on Atlantis, and with the connection of David, it was very, very timely that we were connected so that he can present his information on Atlantis. So I'd like to introduce David now. So it's David Arkenstone Barnett. He's a professional photographer, painter, lecturer, and singer. Resides in the town of Kaipoi, I hope I've said that right. It's just north of Christchurch in New Zealand. Originally from London, England, David is predominantly known in New Zealand for his work in ufology, a path that opened to him over 37 years ago while serving in the New Zealand Navy. In this scenario, the ship he served on had a unique close encounter with a USO, an unidentified submerged object, out in the Pacific, an experience that left a profound effect on David and ultimately his direction in life, which has been one of self-discovery, personal development, and research. For many years now, David has been researching on the fabled city of Atlantis and has come up with a profoundly new hypothesis on this legendary civilization, which incredibly includes New Zealand. He regularly lectures on this subject, which is an insightful, succinct, and informative presentation explaining both scientifically and spiritually what Atlantis was, its purpose, its current location, and what became of it. It will also explain what is occurring on our planet right now and in the future from an energy and harmonic perspective, how Atlantis is once again rising. As well as lecturing, David professionally paints and exhibits his artwork in both galleries and regional exhibitions throughout the year. As an artist, his artwork reflects many of the Atlantean beliefs and can be seen as being a major influence over his range of paintings known as the Atlantis Rising and Constellation and Shining One series. So without further ado, David, I'll hand it over to you. Welcome aboard.
Well, thank you, Kim, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have been invited to speak to you today. Before I go into any of what I'm going to discuss, I would just like to mention some thanks, particularly, as Kim said, to Rob and to Rose, who have introduced Kim and I together. Rob and Rose have been friends of mine for many, many years. We've worked together, we've done workshops together, we've done expos together, and I'm delighted with how they link people together from all over the world. So thank you, Rob, and to Rose for bringing us all together. It's always a pleasure to connect with like-minded individuals from all over the world. It's one of the more humbling experiences that I've had in my life, and with my research, which is now coming up for nearly 40 years, researching, developing, visiting countries around the world, and to be able to present it in the way that I do tonight. I would also like to acknowledge that what I'm going to present to you is a personal story. It's a personal journey. It is uniquely mine. I'm here to share the experiences and the revelations and the discoveries that I've made through my journeys. I'm not here in any way to convince you, to change you, to tell you that what I'm saying is true or not. What I'm sharing is a story based upon my experiences. I would also like to say before starting that my work is an amalgamation of other people's theories and investigations and sciences, of which I have absorbed and adopted into my own work, and have been links to the areas of research that I have been doing for many, many years. And by that, I'd like to acknowledge those greats that have come before me, certainly. Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, um, other great minds whose works I have absorbed and are able to use in the work that I do now. So I'd just like to be grateful and gratitude to those people as well. So I'm going to just do a little bit of an intro about who I am, and then I'm going to go into slides. Now, the reason why I use slides is because I like to be able to present as much information in the form of evidence. And over all the years that I've been lecturing, which have been many years, I understand from personal experience that people do like to know and have evidence as to what is being presented. It gives it a greater dimension, greater depth than just saying it. So as much as possible, I bring in spiritual, scientific informations. I present it in an illustrated form so that you can actually see what it is I'm talking about. It just makes things so much easier. I hope I get the slides right, because I've never actually done it in this format. Normally I'm presenting in front of people live, and I have a large screen behind me, and I'm able to sort of show the images right there. So I'm hoping, with fingers crossed, that I can get this right, and you'll be able to see the images that I'm going to show. But just a little bit about myself. And Brownie, you said it when you acknowledged that Kim's parents are involved in the work that she does and how important that is. I can relate to that because I was actually brought up in a spiritual environment, which I think really helped me in my life's journey, because it gave me an enormously open mind to all things that are possible. And by that I mean that in 1973, the Maharishi came over from India to England with transcendental meditation, and my parents got involved with it. In fact, they were one of the first few individuals that became involved with the organization. My mother became the office administrator, and our home became the meeting place for meditation nights or potluck dinners. So I was brought up with an incredible environment of spirituality, meditation. I was only very young back then, but I would join in with the meditation evenings, chanting and so forth, and mantra meditations. And then that's when I was 8 years old, I was finally initiated into meditating myself. So I was brought up with gurus, I was brought up with ashrams, I was brought up with wearing beads and seeing people wearing saris and fezzes. And that was my experience, and I feel very enriched by those experiences. And my parents then became personal development teachers, and they became involved with one of the largest Australasian organizations in the 80s and 90s, in the 2000s. And they became my teachers. I did their workshops with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of other people. So it was a very interesting experience to have my own parents become my teachers, which was very, very interesting when you were having cathartic releasing relating to your parents and your experiences of your parents. And mine were right in front of me. So I had a unique front row seat in relation to that. And it can be both challenging and very rewarding. I'd like to say the latter. So, as I said, because of that, it gave me an incredibly open mind to all things that are possible. And I'm very grateful for that, because like all of us, I'm sure I've been bombarded with information spiritually, personal developmentally wise, scientifically wise, coming out the wazoo, that has enabled me to be open to all things that are possible. And it has allowed me to become what I call a generalist. And by that, I mean that I have knowledge of a lot of things, or a little bit of knowledge in a lot of areas. And that has allowed me to be able to the years have gone by, as new information comes in, I can bridge the gap between something that seems over here and something that is over there. And by bridging it together, you find that in fact the two things merge into one and everything seems to make sense. I'm sure we've all done that. So what I'm going to present to you today is information that I hope on some levels will be able to bridge things between your own philosophies, ideals, and beliefs. Now, the things that I'm going to talk to you about, some of it will be things that you already know. Some of it will be things that you've never heard about before. Some of it you may go, wow, that's fascinating. Some of it you may be really scared about. And I'm really truthful when I say some of the things I may say may really concern or scare you. I don't mean that to happen. It may not. It may make you go, Yahoo! But I'm just giving you my little theatrical trailer at the beginning just to say that it may do that. The other thing that may happen, and I know Kim wasn't possibly going to say it, but I'll say it anyway, is that there are very few of these events that I do where the transmission is shut down. I'm hoping, with both fingers and toes crossed, that that doesn't happen this evening. But I'm just, yes, thank you, Brownie, yeah. I'm just letting you know that there are very few of these podcasts or events that I do where there is a transmission involved, including cell phone, that at some stage, normally halfway to 2/3 of the way through, that the transmission is cut. Okay, it does happen. I know other people it can happen too. I'm hoping it doesn't happen because it does break the flow of the conversation. So I think Kim has got it in place that if that was to happen, then there's means to be able to reconnect again. So just a little advice there in case it does happen. Okay. So as Kim mentioned, there are two sides or two sections to what I'm going to talk about. One is indefinitely, yes, the story of what happened in the military, because one rolls into the other. Yes, I did serve in the military. Yes, I then from the military went into over 30 years in the security industry. And it seems quite odd that somebody who has been brought up quite spiritually, as I was, ended up in the military and ended up in the security industry. But there is a synchronicity to all of that, which I'm going to share with you and how that happened. But as I said, I'm going to start at the very beginning. So thank you so much. So as I said, I like to provide you with evidences to me. And I show that in, as I say, in pictorial form. And when I say I was brought up in a spiritual environment and brought up with gurus here, so I just wanted to sort of show you these images. Now, this is me, the little fellow in the middle. That's me sitting next to one of the gurus that we followed. And again, it's just me showing you information that just highlights this is the lifestyle that I actually did lead. I was brought up in a spiritual environment. And it's just a little something just to highlight that that is indeed correct. So that's me sitting there. I'm about 9 years old. So as I said, brought up in a spiritual environment. I lived in different countries. I did live in places like Israel, which I call my Jesus life. And what I will do is the information that I'm going to give you, again, is going to some of it is going to be available that you can actually Google yourselves and actually be able to read for yourself that it's actually factual. Anyway, so what I'm just going to share with you now is what actually happened in the military. And the reason I'm showing you this building, this is actually the Auckland Museum in Auckland. And the story basically starts, I'm sitting on that grass verge there in front of the museum, which looks over the whole of Auckland. And it looks over the Auckland Harbour. And this is round about March of 1986. And I'm sitting there with a friend, and I'm looking down and I'm watching the New Zealand Navy warships leaving the harbour going out to sea. And as best as I can explain, a voice inside of me literally said, you need to join the military. You need to join the Navy. And it seemed the most ridiculous thing to experience or to hear or to feel. Because as I said, I was brought up in a spiritual environment. Why on earth would I want to join a military that was to do with the complete opposite of what I believed in? But that building is symbolic to me because it was where I sat when I was told that I needed to join the military, and I did. I didn't realize, though, that the reason I was going to join was because of the experience that I was going to have. This is the actual ship that I served on, which is known as the HMNZ Southland. It's a Leander-class frigate, and I served on it for a few years as a sonar man. And for those of you who understand sonar, hunting of submarines under the water, and that's what I trained exclusively in. The reason I wanted to point out this ship is because, again, I want you to know that I did indeed serve on that vessel. And there are some points of the ship I just wanted to point out for your view, because the next image is going to highlight. If you look on the front of the ship where the gun would normally be, you'll see that there's a circular turret, okay? That's important. Up to the right of that on the bridge, you'll see the white ray dome. And then on the main mast, you'll see a triangular shaped radar. Now, those things are important because I want you to know that that was indeed the vessel that I served on. And that's me standing there on the forecastle of the vessel. And if you look to my right, there again, you will see exactly the same circular structure, which is called an Ikara missile. Behind that, you'll see the radome, and above that, the main mast, there's that triangular radar. I show it because, again, it's just evidences to the fact that I actually did serve on this particular vessel. It's just my way of showing to you all that this actually was a vessel that I served on. Here's just another picture of me. I'm about 19 years old, by the way, okay? So what actually happened, if I might explain? Okay, that's a picture of a sonar system. The story goes very succinctly like this. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the ship was playing war games with itself. And the ship was closed up for what's called defense stations, which means that there is a skeleton crew 24 hours of the day manning the ship. And I'm on the sonar system, which is very similar to this one here, about 1 o'clock in the morning. There are two guys, one to my left and one to the right, and a sonar controller sitting directly behind and slightly elevated so that he could look down and see our screens. You'll notice that on the picture that I'm showing you, you'll see these tracker balls, which are encased within the desk to the right of the sonar system, a black tracker ball. When you roll that on the screen, you can circle an object and you can follow it. Does everybody can see that? It's quite easy? Okay. So my job was to sit in front of a particular screen and to observe the sound waves going out and to detect any objects. Now, when you're trained in sonar, you're trained to be able to tell the differences between what's called a biologic, which is a whale or a dolphin, reverberations, which are bubbles, and an object, which is a submarine. Now, around about 1 o'clock in the morning, an object appeared on my scope, which is not unusual. So I moved the tracker ball to the object, and I pushed a button which is called enable, and to the top of that image you see, the computer switches on and gives you all the information you need about the object. It'll give you, hopefully, its size, its speed, its distance, and so forth. Now, the object was approximately 20 kilometers rear or astern of our vessel. We couldn't see the side profile because it was directly behind us, but we were able to get a reading of the width of the object. And the width came back as 150 feet wide. Now, that's the width. Now, to give that into comparison, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier is about 125 feet wide. This is 150 feet wide, so it's wider than a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And it was 20 kilometers directly behind us. The ship, we reported to the bridge that there was an object there. So the bridge decided to speed up and to turn to port and to turn to starboard. But the object turned directly with us, and it didn't move from directly behind, staying at 20 kilometers the whole time. It moved, as I said, at the same speed for about 15 to 20 minutes, and eventually got to the point where the captain of the ship had to be contacted. He went up to the bridge. He did the same thing. He sped us up. He slowed us down. He turned to port. He turned to starboard. The object stayed directly behind us at 20 kilometers and didn't change. To cut a long story short, he eventually speeded up to 28 kilometers and turned to starboard at about a 65-degree turn, which forced the object to turn sharply with us and giving us at long last a side profile. And the object was 800 feet in length, 800 feet by 150 feet wide. Now, the largest submarine in the world, which is the Russian Typhoon, is 550 feet in length and only about 55 feet wide. So this object was vastly bigger than that. So now we knew we had something that was really strange and something we had not encountered before. The other guys who were sitting next to me were trying to get propeller sounds. There was nothing. It was a silent object. And then eventually, after about 35 minutes of this cat and mouse chase, the object sped up. And it was a physicist friend of mine who was able to do the maths, because the object moved from 20 kilometers behind us to underneath us in about 3.5 seconds. He worked out mathematically it was traveling over 5,000 kilometers an hour under the water, okay? Over 5,000 kilometers an hour. As the object went and passed directly underneath us, the ship lost all power, completely lost power. We were totally adrift. Every conceivable light went out, the backup generators were drained, everything was sucked dry, and we were left adrift. So now we had to get literally 250 crew members from out of their bunks onto the flight deck at about 1:30 in the morning out in the Pacific in the pitch black. The only thing we had available was matches and candles. We are talking about the 80s here, so because even our torches didn't work. All the backup lighting that would normally switch on when all the generators go down, nothing worked. So everything was sucked dry. So we lit candles. We had to go down into the lower decks. We could hear the crew calling out, screaming, because they were in pitch black and they didn't know what had happened. And we had to get them out onto the flight deck. We were now adrift, and there was the potential that we could hit a reef and actually sink. So we had to get everybody up onto the flight deck. So there's 250 of us on the flight deck out in the Pacific until eventually, miraculously, over an hour later, the engineers managed to get one of the steam turbines operational, which meant that one engine was able to be operated, and we limped back to Wellington, which is our capital city, to which we then reported to the Admiralty. Myself and my colleagues that were in what's called the sonar control room were advised by the executive officer of the ship that we were to remain silent about the incident, and we were never to discuss the incident at all, which didn't stop me from talking about it within about 10 minutes after I got off the ship. We found out later that this Nimitz-class carrier was in the same vicinity as us. It shouldn't have been, because it was meant to be in the Indian Ocean, but it wasn't. It was close by us, just off the, as I say, about 600 kilometers north east of New Zealand. It wasn't meant to be there, but we discovered that an hour before we detected our object, this US aircraft carrier known as the Carl Vinson also detected a huge UFO. It scrambled its jets. Its jets encountered this huge object. They chased it, and the object then plummeted into the ocean. We therefore think that the object that we detected was the same object, but we weren't aware of this particular vessel being in the same vicinity as us. It left me, I think, years and years later with the question of, were we actually in the same location just by chance? Or were we actually part of something that was vastly bigger than even I anticipated or even knew about? That's a question I still haven't an answer for. But what we did do, and by the way, that's a cockpit image of the object that was released by the Pentagon. So what happened was then we reported to the New Zealand Admiralty. Rear Admiral Tempero was the person that our skipper reported to. He then stated that he was going to open a file, an investigation into the event of what happened to the Southland. This is him here. 3 months later, he died under unexplainable circumstances. As you can see there, it says Tempero died suddenly in May 1987. I do remember that. It was very uncertain what happened, but he was just in the throes of the investigation as to what happened to the Southland. Okay. Now, I'm not getting into conspiracy here. I'm just pointing out facts of what happened during this particular event. So I tried to then find the captain of the vessel some time ago, but he died unexpectedly in 1995. At the age of 55 years old, he suddenly died. Now, the other thing is, he rose to the rank of Commodore of the New Zealand Navy, but you can't actually find any information about him online. Rob, that may be something that you may enjoy trying to find. Okay, John Leonard. Okay, try and find him. I guarantee you won't find anything. He's disappeared off the face of the earth. He was the captain of the vessel. So all the information that one would hopefully be able to find in relation to what happened is disappearing. I have reached out to the other members of the crew, but I can't get hold of anybody. So I did the next best thing, which was I actually went to the New Zealand archives to request the folders or the files of the Southland, in particular in relation to that event. So this is me sending a request to the archives. And in particular, I was after the file which says Plans, Operations, Readiness, Collisions, and Grounding, which is file R15980773. That is the file that I needed that had the information in relation to what happened to us. So the archives came back to me with this, restricted, okay? All the other files in relation to the Southland, in the month of February of 1987, which is when the event happened, about anything else that you want to know about what happened on the ship is available, except the one file that I needed, which is restricted and will not be accessible till 2062. I don't quite know if I'll be ready for that then. I may be a bit older, but anyway. So the closed case there. So I'm just explaining what happened, because when I did leave the Navy, and I left shortly after that, because I realized that the reason I joined was to have that one experience, because that completely changed my life, that experience, because I was in the heart of the event. I was the person who detected the object in the first instance. I was in the middle of it all, and the story itself, which is now known as the Southland event, has become in ufology circles around the world quite a famous story. Okay. When I left the Navy, I literally went from the ship into the security industry. And again, it seemed an odd thing to do because, again, I was actually juxtably still doing the workshops that my parents were teaching in personal development here in New Zealand. But I went into that industry again because something was going to happen. Information was going to happen. And I spent the next 33 years in that industry. So was I in the industry? Yes, I was. Oh, by the way, sorry, the Soul Foundation, I just wanted to talk about that. I'm not certain if you've all heard of the Soul Foundation. This is a group of in America, this is physicists, military people, mathematicians, teachers who have got together and created the Soul Foundation. And their group is to disclose and to share information in regards to the story of UAPs and USOs. If anybody would like to connect to them, the Soul Foundation, it's very much worthwhile. One of their leading physicists, a guy called Kevin Knuth, has become a dear friend of mine. He is the Associate Professor of Physics from the University of Albany in New York. He came to New Zealand to visit me to discuss the Southland event. and he now himself lectures in front of physicists and scientists around the world about my story and other stories in relation to UFOs, UAPs, USOs, and the existence of them in our solar system and our universe and so forth. Here he is in Stanford University in November of last year, and he's talking in front of about 500 physicists and mathematicians and other like-minded individuals. He's a very brave man to do that, but he's very much supported by these physicists in regards to his work in UAPs. And here he is, as you can see, he's sharing the story I've literally just told you, okay, in front of all those academic minds. And it was he who worked out the speed of the object as it went underneath our ship. So this is me in the security industry. Just wanted to show you again that I was indeed in the security industry. You may recognize some faces in the, there's the late Shane Warne. To the right of him, that's me, I was his bodyguard. To the top, you'll see the Royal, that's Prince Harry, I was his security. So I just wanted again just to show that that was an area of industry that I did go into, which then led me to this. How did it do that, you may ask? Well, because I was involved in military contracts. I was involved in military security, particularly with the Americans. And in Christchurch, where I live, the Americans have a facility known as Deep Freeze. It's situated next to our international airport. It is a large hangar, and it is where the Americans fly between the outside world to their bases in Antarctica. They've been doing that since the 1960s. Christchurch is known as the gateway to Antarctica, and it is where all the military personnel, NASA personnel, and the likes come to and fro, and that's all done through Christchurch. I have done the security for that establishment. I've also done the security and overseen the security for New Zealand military bases. And it was through those contacts and that information that eventually brought me to the subject of Atlantis. But what do we actually know about Atlantis? The answer is very little. Kim and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, and I was showing that even though when we think of Atlantis, it conjures up an enormous sense of connection, romanticism, technology, crystals. For a number of people, it represents something very fundamental and very powerful, previous life connections and so on. But what do we actually know about it? The answer, very, very little. As I said to Kim, Atlantis for me is on the same bookshelf as King Arthur and Robin Hood, which means that we have enormous amount of literature and information about these individuals, but we actually have next to no evidences to their existences at all. I myself researched King Arthur when I was back in the UK, and there are dozens and dozens of books in relation to this magical figure. Guinevere, Arthur, Lancelot, Merlin, Excalibur, and yet there is absolutely no evidences that they actually existed at all. So that is the same with Atlantis. The only time, or the first time we hear about Atlantis, is when Plato, back in 360 BC, got together with a group of other philosophers, and he presented the story about this incredible civilization that had an enormously powerful naval force. That, by the way, is really important to remember, a naval force. Through what's called the Cretaceous monologues, which was a number of pieces of literature that he discussed and that was scribed about this place called Atlantis. But that's it. That's all we know, just based on a few details, pieces of information. And yet from that, there has come a wealth of books, films, and information, but it's based on very little. So how do we know of his existence? Well, there's actually more than you think. And one of the questions people do ask me regularly is the term I use, Atlantis rising, what do I mean by that? Does it mean that Atlantis is going to rise out of the ocean again and we are going to see it? The answer is no. Two reasons. Atlantis never sunk beneath the waves in the first place. That in itself is a myth. Okay? Water is involved, but not the way that we actually think. Atlantis rising is the rising spiritual consciousness of the Atlantean culture. And the interesting thing is that people don't realize that they are actually living with spiritual terminologies, belief systems, and technologies that can trace its roots back to the civilization of Atlantis. Sometimes we find that the things that we are seeking are right in front of us. And in fact, we are living with the Atlantean spiritual consciousness and information every single day by those who have tuned themselves into a spiritual life and existence. If we look back, the personal development that is taught today, that my parents taught in the 80s and 90s, traces itself back to the connections of the information and the spiritual literature of the Eastern philosophies and the religions of the time. And they can trace themselves even further back to Atlantis. The technologies that we are using today, that most of it has been created by Tesla, that we use every day. We use Wi-Fi, we use Bluetooth, the cell phones, alternating currents, were the creation of Nikola Tesla. And Tesla himself stated that his ideas came from Atlantis, but he had to use rudimentary technologies that were available to him at the time to recreate them. But he created free flow energy. Okay, that was based on Atlantean harmonic crystal technology. Rob knows that better than anybody as the crystal man. Okay, we in the Navy used crystal technology. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, the means to create the sound pulse that you all famously hear emanating from the ship and going out into the ocean is created using the piezoelectric effect. Okay, piezoelectric. We used a technology called a transducer that was lowered into the ocean that produced the sound tone, and the transducer was encased in quartz crystal. Why? Again, Rob is the perfect person to tell you, because quartz crystals amplify energy by up to 1,000 times. If you put an energy source into a quartz crystal, it will amplify it out over 1,000 times more. So the reason why in the Navy we were able to create such a huge electrical sound pulse into the ocean was because we were using quartz crystal piezoelectric technology. And that was back in the 80s. Okay? So the Atlantean culture was crystal-based, harmonic energy. Tesla created free flow energy, and famously you would have known the Tesla Tower that he created, which famously he was able to transfer energy from a single source to and transmit it to any point on the globe. Free flow energy, Atlantean free flow energy, Atlantean technology. So we are living with Atlantean terminologies, Atlantean culture, spiritual beliefs, and technologies every day. We just don't know that we're doing it. We don't realize that we are. Plato spoke about the Atlanteans being half god, half human. In many of the things I'm going to talk about, they are lectures within themselves, and I'm sorry I can't go too much deeply into certain things. I can only have a certain amount of time to generalize and skim over a lot of these things, but I will tell you each time I say, this is in itself a lecture, okay? So the half god and the half human beings that Plato was talking about, in my research have uncovered that that was in fact the Anunnaki. Now, I know sometimes the Anunnaki have a negative connotation connected to them, but when you delve deeper and deeper and deeper into who they were, it actually makes a lot of sense. And again, that's a lecture on itself, okay? So Plato spoke about Atlantis, and he spoke about these, the city of Atlantis and the design of the city of Atlantis as it looks here. Um, you've got these circular waterways connected to a central hub. And that is traditionally what people think of when they think of Atlantis, okay? Now, I know some of you may say, I've seen that before in the Eye of Africa, okay? It seems to show a very, very similar geography and a very similar outlay in relation to Atlantis based on Plato's terminologies, okay? So we're talking about crystals, okay? So we're talking about the crystals of Atlantis and why it was so important. I personally remember the first time I got into personal development, I seem to gravitate towards crystals instantly. And I think most people would say crystals are the first thing they seem to connect to when they turn to a spiritual lifestyle or connect spiritually. Crystals are the first thing. And there's a question as why that is. I personally, I believe it's because of a connection to Atlantis and based on the fact that crystals were used exclusively in Atlantis. And as it says, crystals create the least amount of entropy than any other known structure in the universe in their purest form. Okay? And then when we think of the Atlantis, I just wanted to present an image of what Atlantis meant to me. Pyramids seem to be the focus when you think of Atlantis. And again, there's a reason behind that. I threw this in just out of interest, and if those who are into electricity or electrical circuitry, this is an aerial view of the Great Pyramids of Giza. I don't know if anyone else would look at that and think that looks remarkably familiar to something else. There you have a modern day motherboard. Looks rather familiar, doesn't it? Again, is it a possibility? I'd like to think it is, but I threw that in there because, as we know, the harmonic energy that is associated with the pyramids is not by chance. And the fact that the technologies that we use nowadays that produce a similar field of energy, we're talking about structure. And I'm leading you somewhere here. If you look at the architect of all these places around the world, we've all seen them. And we've all marveled at the intricacies, and we've marveled at the structures of ancient civilizations. We're told by the experts that it's random. It's just by chance that they look similar. We know that we have engineers who say categorically that they have a tough time trying to reproduce such structures to such precise dimensions that they fit together so perfectly with laser precision. Why? Is it just by random chance that civilizations seemed to randomly create identical structures to identical formations and precisioning? Is that random? This one here is one of the oldest. It's about 300,000 years old. Again, precision. And where is it? It's here in New Zealand, in the North Island. The Kamanawa Wall, one of the oldest formations in the world of this precise formation of construction. And it's right here in the North Island of New Zealand. Not a lot of people know that. Well worth visiting if you get a chance to see it. Again, why are these structures identical all over the world? Randomly, again, the archaeologist said it's just random chance that the designs were identical. Just random chance, because remember, the ancient civilizations had no contact with each other, as we are told, location. When I normally do a lecture, I ask the people there where they think Atlantis is, the actual location of Atlantis. I don't know if I could do this, Kim, in the same way. Can people say where they think it is? Can they call out or say it's here, there? I'm just interested to where people think Atlantis was, the central location of Atlantis. Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? If you do, just raise up your hand or unmute and one at a time.
Bermuda Triangle, Millie.
Bermuda Triangle, yep. Where else?
We've
Brownie,
got one in
where
the
is
chat
To
that's
say
saying,
a wee little place called
Scotland.
sorry,
Scotland? Yeah.
we've got a couple in the chat saying the
Scotland.
whole world or under Antarctica.
Yeah.
I'm going to say
Brownie,
Pacific Ocean north of New Zealand. There we are.
the Pacific
Yeah,
Ocean
Rob,
just north.
you'd be happy, Rob?
Rob knows that he can't talk.
All right.
Anybody else?
Rob.
So we've got
Yeah,
the-
go ahead.
Text me, Rob.
Go ahead,
text me.
Frank.
Yeah,
What
I
was that,
think it's
sorry?
under Antarctica.
Under Antarctica, Frank. Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
Anyone
I've
else?
heard it a couple of times.
All right.
Okay.
No dramas.
well.
If you can just drop your hand, Frank. All right, David.
So we've got
Lemuria.
Scotland, under Antarctica, north of New Zealand. There is obviously the central Atlantic Ocean. Some people say the east and west coasts of the United States, and so on and so forth. Well, the beautiful thing is every single one of you is correct. Okay, all of you are correct. Now, that begs the question, David, what the hell are you talking about? Okay, well, let me try another way of explaining this to you. Now, if anybody understands, does anybody understand what they're looking at here? Particularly, you're looking at an image of the world, but there are certain countries in red. What do you think that depicts? Any idea?
Commonwealth countries.
Yeah, Commonwealth, I was going to say.
Commonwealth countries. That was from, is that Karen, is it? Is that you said that?
Karen, yes.
Oh, sorry, Karen. Oh, I apologize.
No,
Guess
no,
what?
Karen.
She's been called
Yeah,
worse.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, it is the Commonwealth countries or the British Commonwealth during the times of round about the 1900s and the 20th century, when the British Empire covered about 30% of the world. 30%, this tiny little country managed to create an empire that covered 30% of the world. And I like to play a little game here. I'm imagining that you're a visiting extraterrestrial. You arrive, let's say, in good old Australia, okay? And because at that particular time, you know, the Australian Commonwealth or the Commonwealth of Australia, you've got pictures of the Queen, if you're going back 100 and something years, you're following a British political structure and so forth. It would be understandable that our little friend here may think that he's arrived in the central location of the British Empire, of which the Australian person say, no, we are part of the Commonwealth. No, we are not the central location of the empire. So off he pops and he visits, say, India. Why? Because at that time, India was following a British government ruling. It was overseen by the British. It had British people there, it had the British military there. And so our friend would say, quite understandably, is this England? Is this the heart of the British Empire? The answer is no. So he gets a little bit more confused until somebody actually tells him that the British Empire, or the heart of the British Empire, yes, does have a central location, but it has a global reach. And at the heart of that empire is one place located here in a city called London. And that's where the central politic and the governance of that empire is located. So when we're talking about Atlantis, we're talking about the fact that Atlantis was a global culture. It was a global civilization, but it had a central location, yes. And it is the central location that we are finding of interest. That is why you have architect that is identical all over. That is why you have structures of pyramids that are identical. It wasn't that there was no connection between them. No, there was a global connection because it was a global civilization. But there was indeed, yes, a central location. But what happened? Something happened. Something happened to change everything. This is the part that I know maybe of interest with Kim, is what happened on our Earth, what happened on this planet. So it says here, many members of the science community, which includes physicists, archaeologists, and even climatologists, agree that between 10 to 12,000 years ago, a cataclysmic event took place on Earth, which changed the face of the planet forever. Even certain religions, even though their chronological times are different, support this hypothesis. But what was this event?
Volcanic eruption.
Volcanic eruptions, yes. Now, the thing is this, many stories talk about a cataclysmic event, but they don't say what happened. They talk about the floods. They talk about the volcanoes. They talk about the earthquakes that happened round about this time. But what caused it? What was the stone that was dropped into the water that created the ripple effect? Even in the Old Testaments, you talk about Noah's Ark, you talk about the great floods. In literature and history, it talks about a cataclysmic event. Yes, we acknowledge something happened, but what was it? Now, many people think, yes, the Earth was hit by an asteroid. Some people think it was Nibiru or Planet X that came close to the planet and caused this event. This is the part that is going to really make you think, because I'm going to explain what happened. And I'm going to tell you what occurred that started the chain reaction and created the changes on this planet 12,000 years ago. What not a lot of people know is that in ancient text and in ancient history, there is the story of what arrived
Let's go.
on this planet that caused the event. And I'm talking for those Australians, the Aboriginals that go back 40,000 years, and a lot of their literature talk about a time when something wasn't there and then it was. There are African tribes that go back thousands of years ago, and in their history and their historical texts, they talk about a time when this thing was not there and then it was. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And by the way, every
Was it
single...
the two sons?
What was that, sorry?
Was there two sons and one son, the son, disappeared, one of them?
The answer to that one, no.
I don't.
Rob
No.
spilled the beans in the chat. Millie, get out of the chat. Rob has spilled the
Really
beans.
now? How dare he do that? He's a terrible bean spiller, he is. Okay, I'm going to show you. It was when the moon arrived. Now, a lot of you now are looking very perplexed, very confused. How can it be? Yes, when the moon originally arrived. It was never here 12,000 years ago. Now, we were all brought up believing and being told that the moon was remnants of the formation of the planet. No, it wasn't. The moon is much, much older than planet Earth. Now, by the way, the history of why and how the moon arrived is a lecture in itself. I'm just grazing the surface here. The other hypothesis is that the moon was grabbed by the gravitational pull of the Earth. That is also incorrect. The moon is way too big for the Earth's gravity to just grab it randomly as it was traveling by. Our moon, as you well know, is the largest of the moons in our solar system. It is the only moon that we only see one side, even though it's in a rotation in itself. It rotates in such a way that we never see the dark side of the moon. That is the only moon that happens with. In fact, the moon itself doesn't necessarily go and orbit the Earth. We're actually in a binary rotational relationship with our moon, a binary. Okay, so we work in symbiotic relationship with each other, and we sort of rotate around with each other. Carl Sagan stated, the chances of our moon being perfectly located at just the right distance between the sun and Earth to support complex life, for it to be the perfect diameter to fit exactly into the circumference of the sun during a lunar eclipse. The chances of this being a random coincidence is absolutely zero. That was from the late, great Carl Sagan. And if you look at the lunar eclipse of which we had recently, how can it be that by random chance that our moon just fits perfectly into the circumference of the sun, because it is perfectly located at the right distance between the sun and the earth that then created or assisted in complex life, although we were already here. It's not random chance. It was placed exactly where it needed to be. Now, as I said, most of you are now thinking or asking, then what the hell is it? Why is it here? Yeah, that, as I say, is another, that's another lecture altogether. But it's right in plain sight, okay? Right in plain sight. I hope now, or I'm sure now, you will look up into the sky and look at the moon in a very different way. The question is, what is it? Ironically, about 2 years ago, a film was released called Moonfall. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a slightly tongue-in-cheek movie, but it's fun to watch. But it's actually about the moon not being what we think, but it's in fact a spaceship. Now, I know that sounds very grand, and when you say it out loud, it sounds very odd, but they were wrong. They were going along the right track in that movie. If you haven't seen it, it is worth watching.
Sorry,
Sorry,
David.
yes, go ahead.
There's actually some information coming out about that at the moment, about the construct of the moon and who placed it there and what is actually inside. So it supports what you're saying here. We'll be covering that in a history session a little bit later on down the track as well. So I just wanted to let you know that the supporting evidence is actually coming to light.
We know the moon is hollow. That's readable information. That was created by NASA during the, and this is another question, did man go to the moon? I don't want to get into that subject at the moment, but we know that NASA did purposely fire one of their rockets into the moon, and it rang like a bell about 4 to 5 hours, which indicated that it was certainly hollow inside. So what I'm going to discuss now, as succinctly as possible, is the chain of events that then happened. We've just discussed that the stories of the floods and the volcanoes and the changes on the face of the planet was indeed caused by the gravitational effect of the moon arriving, okay? You can just imagine the tectonic and the magnetic forces that were placed upon this planet when such a structure as big as the moon suddenly came into our gravitational field. It had enormous impact and it changed everything. The first thing that it did was it actually pushed the Earth off its axis. This illustration shows 2 access points. It's sometimes, I think, we've often wondered why they talk about true north and magnetic north. I grew up always knowing the terms true north and magnetic north. True north indeed indicates the location of the planet's axis prior to the moon arriving, and magnetic north is where the planet's tilt of 23.5 degrees pushed it over to where we are today. So this is why the planet is at a tilt that has been caused by the arrival of the moon. It therefore created enormous tectonic influences and forces upon the planet. And it was this gentleman here called Charles Hapgood who discovered what actually happened after. Now, Charles Hapgood, back in the 50s, was he was a geologist. He wasn't recognized in any way as being a scientific genius in any way. He was based in America, but he had a hypothesis. And his hypothesis was that the crust of the planet actually floats on the mantle. The entire crust of the planet can shift and move and slide across the mantle. Now, at the time, we're talking about 1952-53, he was poo-pooed by the academics of that time, who stated that he was wrong, that he was a fool, and that his hypotheses were in fact completely wrong. He didn't care. And in 1958, he released a book called The Earth's shifting crust. Now, there was one scientist, one, who did support his hypotheses and did support his work and stated to him, yes, you are correct in your work. And that was Albert Einstein. And as you can see in the book, the foreword in the book was by Albert Einstein. Einstein was happy and proud even to give his name to this book because he absolutely believed that Charles Hapgood was correct. Now, today, the shifting crust hypothesis is fact. You can Google it. It is now acknowledged and it has been scientifically proven that indeed our Earth's crust does float on the mantle and can shift. So indeed, when the moon came into Earth's orbit, it created enormous tectonic strains and influences and actually caused the crust to shift south, basically. Now, you may be wondering what that picture is. Did anybody see the film 2012, which was the blockbuster movie talking about the Mayan calendar and the end of the world? It was a blockbuster movie. For those of you who did see it, there's a particular scene in which they are in this aircraft making their way to China, and they have to land and refuel in Hawaii, but Hawaii has been devastated by volcanoes and they can no longer land there and refuel. And they're about to plummet into the sea or land in the sea because they're running out of fuel. But suddenly, China is in front of them. Okay, China is in front of them, and they can't fathom out how it can be that China has shifted about 3,000 kilometers from where it originally was to being right in front of them and available for them to land on it. And the hero in the film silently says, "Thank you, Charles Hapgood." And that's in reference to the fact that the Earth shifting crust in the movie was down to the hypothesis of Charles Hapgood. The other thing that occurred was the magnetic field of the Earth was shifted in an event called polar shift. We are now going through right now polar shift again, big time. The effects that it's having on us physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I'm sure we can all testify to. But the effect it's having on our technologies is also dramatic. The effect it's having on GPS, airlines and shipping and so forth is dramatic because we're going through a dramatic polar shift right now, okay? However, going back to the shifting crust, as the moon created crust displacement, the continents, the entire crust shifted some 3,000 kilometers to the south. The central location of Atlantis shifted to its current location, to where it is today. And somebody, I think it was Frank, who mentioned, indeed, yes, Antarctica. Antarctica is the central location of Atlantis. So when indeed it moved, it shifted to a cold climate zone and it froze over. So when Plato spoke about Atlantis going under the ocean, he was sort of correct. It is encased in water, just not the way we think it was. But that is indeed the central location of Atlantis. But what is interesting is that a new country or a new area of land took up the location of where Atlantis used to be, and that's New Zealand. Now, these are the three great pyramids that have been covered in Antarctica. The pyramids themselves and their location around the world are harmonically placed. Harmonically. Grid system, a lecture again in itself, okay? Manifested and created.
He wasn't wrong when he said he gets cut off.
No, and there we go. That's really interesting. Actually, while we're waiting for him just to jump back on again, very interesting that David mentions that New Zealand is the new location of that, because what most people don't realize is that in actual fact, the the head location of the current financial system is New Zealand. A lot of the people in the, what would we say, upper echelons of society have houses in New Zealand. It's said that the New Zealand Marshal of the military is the highest level military of the world, not the US. So it's really interesting when you start to have a look at the different little threads coming in here and there, that New Zealand actually is very, very integral to what David is talking about in relation to that new location of the head area of Atlantis. So it's kind of making a little bit more sense then that these head things of military, of financial, of housing estates are centered in New Zealand. So interesting threads. I think David's back on again.
Okay, I'm back again. Yeah. That it just cut out on me, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know where I suddenly cut out from.
So you were at the point where you were explaining about New Zealand being the head of Atlantis. You'd just gotten past there. And actually, David, I was just saying to everyone, it's interesting that you have said that, because what a lot of people don't realize is that New Zealand actually is the location of the banking system. It's not Switzerland. It's also the New Zealand Marshal of the military is said to hold the highest rank in the world, not the US. And a lot of the upper echelons have houses at different locations in New Zealand. So very interesting.
I was just going to ask, were you referring to the convergence of the harmonics? The harmonic convergence?
Oh, you mean the grid system?
Yeah.
Yeah, the planet itself, all planets, in fact, every living cell, every living atom, every planet, every moon creates its own energy fields, and the planet creates a natural grid system which is manifested and created by our magnetic field. It creates a lattice effect, which I just showed you the image of. But what we also have is a man-made grid system as well, which interacts with the natural grid system. Again, that in itself is another lecture. And the images I showed you, there's the late Bruce Cathy, who was based in Auckland, New Zealand, was one of the leading researchers into the anti-gravity grid system. It's basically what UAPs use when they come into Earth's orbit and Earth. They connect to the grid system like a monorail system, and they can traverse it. And that's why they were able to be seen moving so fast, because the grid system itself harmonically resonates at the speed of light, and therefore they themselves can travel at incredible speeds when on Earth. Again, that's another subject altogether. I throw it in there because of the fact that Atlantis was located because of its harmonic energy connection to the planet, okay? And using the crystals, it was able to create a global free flow energy matrix. Tesla was creating exactly the same technology with his free flow energy towers, in which he could create these towers that harmonically resonated and were able to then draw energy from the atmosphere and transmit it to any point of the planet. If those of you have heard of the Tunguska explosion in Siberia in 1904, that was Tesla. It wasn't an asteroid or a meteor hitting the atmosphere and creating and flattening thousands of square miles of trees. It was actually Tesla, when he transmitted the energy, he needed a place for the energy to go. There was no receiving towers at that time, so he located an area in Siberia that he knew there was no population there, and that's what created the explosion. Okay, that was the Tunguska event. You can Google that and you'll actually be able to read it. What I'm showing you now on the screen is a gentleman called Buzz Aldrin, and with him there is John Kerry, who was at that time the Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Now, question, why am I showing you images of these two guys in Antarctica? Well, in November of 2016, both of these guys traveled to Antarctica. As I said, at that time, John Kerry was the Secretary of State. And for those who know, the purpose and the role of the Secretary of State is to oversee the embassies, the American embassies around the world. And the ambassadors to those embassies report directly to him. Buzz Aldrin, as we know, was the supposed, again, that's a subject again, the second man to walk on the moon. Okay, not going to get into that one. It's a hot topic, isn't it, always? But he was with John Kerry at the time. Buzz Aldrin had a major breakdown and had to be airlifted instantly off of Antarctica and flown to Christchurch, where he was taken to Christchurch Hospital. He was placed in isolation and he was screaming and yelling, "They're there, they're there, it's all there, the pyramids, it's all there." That's what he was screaming and yelling. How do I know? Because the head of security for the hospital was a guy that I myself placed in that position when I was overseeing the security for the hospital. He was the manager that I put in, and he knew the work that I was involved with. And he was the one that was personally isolated, putting security around Buzz Aldrin. So he rang me and told me that Buzz Aldrin was in the hospital. He was ranting and raving all about the pyramids and those beings that are currently in Antarctica. Now, that's again another subject. Who was he referring to? Who are these beings that have been in Antarctica for millennia? And no, they are not the Atlanteans, okay? They are not the Atlanteans. They are another race called the Viril. And they are responsible for a lot of shit that has gone on this planet for a long time. Buzz Aldrin said, his words were, "They are evil. They are evil," he said. So he was in isolation for about a week. Now, by the way, you can Google this and you will read that indeed he was in Antarctica. You will read that he had a nervous breakdown. You will read that he ended up in Christchurch Hospital for about a week in isolation. Okay? You will not, however, read what he said. Okay? You won't read that. He tweeted it. He tweeted it on the way back between Antarctica and Christchurch. He tweeted exactly those words, but 3 hours later, the tweet was removed. But when he arrived at the hospital, he was still ranting, he was delusional, and he was raving. And it just so happened that the security manager was right there and was able to quote what he has actually said. The other question is, why was he there? Why was somebody who represents NASA in Antarctica? Why was the Secretary of State in Antarctica? Why years earlier have just about all the heads of the great religions all been in Antarctica? Why have political people, including Putin, Obama, the Pope, what were they doing in Antarctica? I don't think they went there just to look at penguins, but who knows? But John Kerry, this is the key. Why is the Secretary of State in Antarctica? Well, let's have a look at some of the scientific establishments in Antarctica currently today. These are scientific establishments. You wouldn't think though, would you? There's the American base of McMurdo. These are all different countries, including the UK, Germany, France, Canada, India, that all have establishments on the ice pack, and they look like these. Are they scientific communities? No, they're embassies. That's why John Kerry was in Antarctica. McMurdo, yes, is an embassy, but an embassy for what reason? Why are there embassies in Antarctica? What is the purpose of embassies being in Antarctica? Embassies are there and they represent their countries for a reason. It's political, it is commercial, it is military. So what are embassies doing in Antarctica. That is part of the lecture about what's in Antarctica. Okay. But I'm happy to take questions if anybody has them. Okay. So once again, the Earth's magnetic field and the polar shift. You may not know that our poles have moved something like nearly 2,000 kilometers from where they originally used to be. Okay? 2,000. Did anybody know that? That our poles have already shifted and are shifting at an alarming rate. Okay, the total distance that our north and south poles have shifted is approximately 2,500 kilometers, or about 1,700 miles from where they used to be. The map there shows to the right the current location of our magnetic pole, and it's moving further and further across to Russia. It's an unusual event in the fact that it's happening so quickly. Polar shift is a natural occurring experience that the planet goes through roughly every 120,000 years. It happens. You can Google research it, it happens. It's scientifically proven. However, this one that is happening right now is happening at an alarming rate. It is moving faster than has ever been predicted, and we are feeling the effects of it right now. I don't know about yourselves, but I certainly do feel the effects of enormous tiredness, slightly lethargics. Doesn't matter how many times I meditate or try and sleep, it doesn't seem to work. I sleep very little. I find it very difficult. And of course, we do feel the effects quite readily. I don't know, Kim or Rob, if you feel the effects of it readily, but certainly it is happening at an alarming rate. Why? Because we're going through the changes once again. When the Earth went through a polar shift 12,000 years ago, the energies changed with it. And by that I mean that the harmonics on the planet were at a specific energy or a specific frequency. That changed when the poles shifted. So Atlantis, for example, its crystals that were in tuned to the harmonics of the planet at that time no longer worked. They no longer worked. Because we are now going through the polar shift again, the planet is realigning itself back to the harmonic frequencies that existed at the time of Atlantis. Now, in Antarctica, there exists a technology called the harmonic generators. And the harmonic generators were used like Tesla's towers. They were responsible for harnessing the energies and transmitting it around the world. Because the Earth's magnetic fields changed, they no longer worked. But now they are starting to switch on again. And a few years ago in Antarctica, they tried to switch them on. They did manage to get some energy out of it, but it had a detrimental effect. And of course, for those of us that live in Christchurch, we know full well of the cause and effect of that, which was the earthquakes that we experienced here in 2010 and 2011. I'm sure most of you know that we had devastating earthquakes here in Christchurch and the Canterbury region. The geologists that were dispatched from some of the great universities around the world and came to Christchurch to investigate what had happened had no answer to our earthquakes. Our earthquakes made they had no understanding. They didn't follow the natural patterns of what earthquakes were supposed to do. They were stumped. How do I know? Because I spoke to a lot of the scientists that came over, because we were doing the security for them whilst they were over here, and they didn't understand what was going on. The reason behind that was because the central location of where it was all being emitted from was nowhere near New Zealand. It was all happening out of Antarctica. And there's a lot of information that's now coming out of Antarctica in relation to these harmonic generators that were being used unsuccessfully and the effect that it had on us over here. In conclusion, again, I've spoken very, very briefly and very quickly. I hope I haven't sort of put too much upon each one of you. As I said, when I'm lecturing face to face, I do draw this out a little bit more. I'm wanting to be as succinct as possible to give you as much information as possible in a very short space of time. There is, as we can all appreciate, an enormous amount going on at the present time. Atlantis in itself is becoming more and more uncovered, and there's a lot more information being made available about it. As I said, for those of us that are doing personal development and are involved in spiritual aspects and are following a spiritual philosophy or understanding, whether it's meditation or crystals or whatever, you're already living the Atlantean culture or the spiritual aspect of Atlantis. And for me, that is incredibly important. And I hope that it is obviously for yourselves as well. Kim, I think that's about all I need to say at the moment. I'm very happy to, if anybody has some questions that they'd like to ask.
Yes, David, could you comment on basically more particularly the two crystals that are held at deep freeze and where they came from, etc.?
Yeah, Rob's referring to, again, the harmonic generators. There's two in Antarctica and there's two being held in Christchurch. And he's referring to the US hangar that's based at deep freeze here by the international airport. The Americans brought over some years ago two of the other harmonic generators, and they're actually stored here in Christchurch, which is why when they turned the ones on in Antarctica, normally what would happen is the ones in Antarctica would resonate and they can transfer that energy over to the generators here at their base in Christchurch. But because we're still in a harmonic that is not exactly the frequencies that existed at the times of Atlantis, they didn't work properly, and the effect of the cause was the earthquakes. So that's what Rob is referring to. So there's two harmonic generators in Antarctica, and there's two stored here in Christchurch.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks. Thank you for that, David. You might just want to stop sharing your screen now, and then we can just have like a sit around. Oh, that's okay. No problems. So firstly, I just wanted to say a big thank you to you for that. A lot of interesting information there. See in the chat, there was one question there saying, who are the evil ones in Antarctica, the Vril and the Who? So I'll just talk about that for a little bit. In the last history session that we did, we covered a lot on the sea cars and the species that's from Alpha Draconis, so the Alpha Dracos and so forth. So they had very much an alliance with the Nazis, as we know. Antarctica was a large Nazi base, or the Neftwaschen. I don't know if I've said that correctly. But the Vril are also very closely associated with the Alpha Dracos as well. I believe they start off, that's where you see, a lot of you might have seen the Black Eyed Club, where a lot of the people end up with having a black eye. It is said that the Vril is the thing that gets inserted into the eye. It causes the black eye, and it actually grows within the body. So it becomes a parasite, if you like, in the body and grows within. My understanding is that the Vril is very closely related to the sea car, in particular the Alpha Dracos, who had a very large base in Antarctica. Now, if you remember back to the last history session, when we talked about this and the way that this species actually infiltrates societies, where they start in at the ground level, they work their way into positions of authority until they are actually running the government. The history of Atlantis from different accounts tells the same story of how that happened, first colonizing and infiltrating the outer colonies, if you like, of Atlantis, of the main area, of the main location or the main city of Atlantis, until it was a gradual takeover in there. So again, the correlation of what you're talking about there, David, with Antarctica and these different species being there, with the pole shifts, is actually in alignment with the history that we talked about last time, with that very situation happening and who changed the settings, if you like.
Yes, very much so. the story of the Vril came out with Admiral Byrd, who originally went to Antarctica as a scientist around about the late 1920s. And he first encountered them at that particular time. So when yes, you're correct, when the Germans, who had an affinity with Atlantis, they believed that the Aryan race of which the Germans believed themselves to be originated from Atlantis, or the Atlanteans. And so they were given enormous opportunity to go to Antarctica to reconnect and hopefully find the source of their what they believed to be their birthright in the Aryan race. And so they did. The Nazis did have an affinity with Atlantis and believed very deeply in it. So when they sent their flotilla, and probably many of you know the story, in the late 30s, when the Germans sent a flotilla to Antarctica to interact with the Vril, and then again the Americans were sent there under Admiral Byrd. There was a battle and so forth, and it's very historical what happened there. Yes, what I find interesting, and again, I'm being very careful with my words here. We know, or I believe, this is my humble opinion, that the Vril very much were involved with the German, the Nazis' attempt at global domination at that particular time. And it is said that the Allied forces were being assisted by another race to counter that event happening, which led to the end of the Second World War. Now, I'm uncertain, but I ask myself the question, is it happening again? Is history trying to be repeated by what is happening with the American politic? And please understand, I'm being and I tread very carefully, because I mean not to offend anybody politically. This is my interpretation and it is my own thoughts. I watch very closely what's happening with the American politic at the moment, obviously with the Trump and Biden and so forth. I found it both interesting and concerning that Trump was quoting Hitler words and from the dossiers and so forth that Hitler first spoke about when he came into power, and that Trump is repeating them now. I'm wondering if the Vril are once again attempting to influence or control at a global level the course of humanity through the American politic. I am very, again, interested and concerned about the outcome of November and what the outcome will be for the American politic and the effect that it will have globally, depending on who gets into power. So I think we're all watching. We're all watching in depth as to what is occurring there and what's happening. But again, I'm being very careful. I'm treading incredibly carefully here. I do remember back in the 80s when this sort of information was first coming out that there was going to be, it was said that there would be a sequence of events that would occur in the decades moving forward to this particular time. And at this particular time, there would be an event occurring, which would then lead into another event occurring. The first event would be an alien invasion, which would bring the planet's militaries together on force to defend and defeat that alien invasion. But the alien invasion is not real. It is based on what is called Project Bluebeam. And Project Bluebeam is the creation of holographic illusion or holographic technology. We first saw its early manifestations of holographic technology in the effects of holographic influences. And again, I'm treading very carefully here, because again, I mean to not offend anybody when I talk about 9/11. The 9/11 and all its atrocities, by the way, which was devastating, was in effect a trial run of the early Project Bluebeam technologies in relation to the aircraft that were supposedly seen and were supposedly involved in the Twin Tower events.
Can I just comment here, David? This group you've happened upon actually follows all of this very, very closely already. So that's it's really helpful that you're not offending anybody. Trust me.
Well, I just like to put it out there, because when you're talking about these sorts of things, it is something that I just want to make sure that I'm only speaking my own thoughts, and I don't want to offend, but I appreciate what you're saying. I do. So Project Bluebeam in its recent the seeding of the satellites that Tesla, what's his name? I've forgotten his name now. Elon Musk. The Musk seeding of the satellites is the top half of Project Bluebeam, and the global repeaters being built for the new technologies for cell phone and so forth, the 5G technology repeaters that have gone global, is the ground force connections for the lattice mainframe, if you want to call it, to create Project Bluebeam, which is the new technologies of holographic technologies that are far more advanced and far more three-dimensional than the early 9/11 version. So the alien invasion is designed to bring the militaries together, global governments together, to defeat this alien invasion that is not real, okay? But then at the end of that event, there will be a real event that is occurring, which is the final coming together of the forces literally of dark and the forces of light. And I'm sure we all have read the Bible in its form. It's called, whether it's Armageddon or whatever you want to call it, it's all about the coming together, the final battle between the forces of light and dark. In my humble opinion, this event, this final event, is the Anunnaki, the Viril, the Dracos, all of that coming together, but there is that final conflict. However, it is felt and it is known that the forces of light will prevail, and that what we're entering, as we all know, is that time of the golden age, whatever you want to call it. Over the decades, it's changed in its name. The new age, the golden age, the age of enlightenment, the age of ascension, whatever you want to call it. It is a better time. The pole switching is creating and manifesting a higher vibration, going back to the vibrations of the times of Atlantis. That is why I created Atlantis Rising. It is the rising energies that we are all experiencing, and that is the effect that it's happening for us at the moment. But we're going through a very challenging time, because, as the saying goes, a wound has to get worse to get better. We're sort of going through that really yucky, icky time, but if we can get through that, things obviously is going to be a lot better, and I think we all feel that. So Atlantis Rising, as I said, is the rising consciousness, the spirituality, the technology, the coming togetherness, working harmonically and harmoniously together. Everything that I'm sure every single person here today is already doing, and the fact that groups like yourselves, Kim, that you've brought together, and Brownie as well, that is Atlantis Rising. And you can call it whatever you want to, by the way. All the names you've given it are perfect. I just called mine Atlantis Rising because for me that's where it emanated from. And yes, people do often ask, where does this, yes, I do get the information that through influence from the people that I know around the world who have donated information to me, but also I download information, and I know that sounds very spiritual. I do dream, and I do dream words, and I do dream equations, and I translate that into the information I'm giving you. I also translate it into my artwork. So the art that I create is indeed is influenced by the downloading of the information that I get. So Atlantis, was it earthbound? No. Did it come from somewhere else? Yes. Where? Vega. How do I know? Because I dreamt the equation that I was able to then use to find out the location of Atlantis. I dreamt the word MA205. MA205. I woke up from a dream. I had MA205. After a few months of research, I discovered that it's an M-class planet in the constellation of Vega. So I painted it, and I know you said, Kim, you were going to send a link to my art, and people will be able to see the piece of artwork that I created that was 9 feet across, which is called Vega MA205, which is the central location, or the original location of the Atlantean race, as I feel it is. And as you can see, the work behind me, that is some of my artwork, again, influenced by the downloading of informations. And I actually paint constellations that, for me, represent these incredible places and these incredible cultures. So I just wanted to share that as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, David. I just wanted to make one comment here on, I don't believe that this is happening again, as you were talking about before with the battle in that's happening in the politics. I don't think it ever left.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
And that's what we're uncovering in the following sessions of the history. So please join us when we do the next ones, and we'll get into those beginnings of where that came from and how that's affected us right through to history today.